The human body has an incredible way of concealing its most serious risks, hiding them beneath muscle tissue and wrapped tightly around essential organs. Deep within the abdomen lies visceral fat, a type of fat that acts quietly but aggressively. It disrupts hormones, interferes with metabolic signaling, and raises inflammation levels without giving obvious external signs. Many people spend years focused on surface-level changes, not realizing that the most critical changes are happening internally, far out of sight. Researchers classify visceral fat as metabolically active. It doesn't just exist passively. It constantly sends chemical messages throughout the body. It releases inflammatory compounds, alters how insulin functions, and slowly redirects metabolic behavior. This internal activity explains why fat loss can feel frustratingly slow. The body isn't resisting randomly, it's responding to deep metabolic signals. Learning about visceral fat isn't about appearance. It's about understanding how deeply it shapes long-term health. Studies repeatedly show that lowering visceral fat reduces the risk of heart disease, type 2 diabetes, and chronic inflammation. And one of the simplest ways to begin reducing it is through walking, a basic activity whose impact is often overlooked. But this is where things get interesting. Walking doesn't immediately target visceral fat. There is a very specific metabolic point when the process actually begins. Once you understand that moment, walking will never feel like a casual activity again. Before we go further, let me ask, did you already know visceral fat behaves more like an organ than stored weight? Drop a comment below. I'm curious how familiar this is for you. Walking is the most natural movement humans perform. No machines, no complex skills, just coordinated motion, gravity, and rhythm. Yet beneath its simplicity unfolds a chain of physiological responses comparable to more intense exercise. As you begin walking, oxygen delivery increases, muscles start tapping into stored fuel, and the nervous system shifts into a focused, balanced state. What makes walking especially effective is that it's sustainable. High-intensity workouts burn energy quickly, but can also spike cortisol in some people, particularly beginners. Elevated cortisol can temporarily suppress fat burning. Walking creates a calmer internal environment, allowing energy to be released steadily instead of forcefully. Research shows that people who walk consistently experience improved insulin response, lower inflammation, and more efficient mitochondria. These adaptations are essential for accessing visceral fat. Think of walking as a gentle ignition that slowly powers up deeper metabolic systems. But one question still remains. At what exact point does walking stop relying on quick energy and begin tapping into stubborn visceral fat? That answer is coming shortly. Stay with me. The body follows chemistry, not guesses. When movement begins, the first energy system activated is the phosphagon system, designed for immediate energy. It only lasts seconds. Next comes glycolysis, where glucose from blood and muscle glycogen takes over. During this early phase, fat isn't yet the main fuel. Your body is assessing demand. Repeated muscle contractions signal mitochondria to increase ATP production. As minutes pass, oxygen availability becomes increasingly important. Once breathing stabilizes, the body can gradually shift toward fat metabolism. Scientists refer to this transition as reaching the fat oxidation threshold. This is when fat becomes a primary energy source. The exact timing differs slightly depending on fitness, hormones, and mitochondrial health, but the biological process is the same for everyone. Walking doesn't burn visceral fat simply because time passes. It happens when the body becomes metabolically prepared, and we're getting very close to pinpointing that moment. Somewhere between your first steps and steady breathing, your body crosses an invisible internal boundary. You won't feel it. There's no sudden rush or discomfort. But metabolically, it marks the shift from easy access fuel to deeper reserves. Scientists measure this using respiratory exchange ratios, tracking oxygen use versus carbon dioxide output. At this stage, glucose usage declines and fat metabolism increases. What makes this fascinating is that not all fat responds the same way. Subcutaneous fat is easier to access. Visceral fat requires more precise conditions. Those conditions emerge during walking once that internal threshold is crossed. One reason walking works so well is that it keeps cortisol from spiking. In this stable hormonal state, visceral fat becomes responsive to longer, lower-intensity activity. The body isn't randomly burning fat, it's responding to a carefully built biochemical environment. Which brings us to the next key factor. Heart rate is the most practical, external signal of fat-burning activation. When it stays in a moderate range, roughly 50 to 70% of max fat becomes the dominant fuel source. Too low, and activation is slow. Too high, and glucose takes over again. During walking, reaching this zone usually takes several minutes, depending on pace. That's why sprinting at the start isn't necessary. Letting heart rate rise gradually creates ideal conditions for visceral fat release. Studies show that people who consistently stay in this zone reduce abdominal fat more effectively. You don't even need a heart rate monitor. Comfortable conversation, steady breathing, and rhythmic movement are reliable cues. This is the zone where fat metabolism becomes sustainable, and within this state, the precise moment visceral fat burning becomes clear. As your walk continues, once breathing and heart rate stabilize, your body shifts away from glucose dominance. This transition is known as beta oxidation. You won't feel it physically, but inside your cells, fatty acids are entering mitochondrial pathways at a higher rate. Research using indirect calorimetry shows this shift occurs after sustained movement. Once oxygen intake supports fat metabolism, timing varies, but the pattern is consistent. Continuous motion leads to a metabolic crossover. This matters because visceral fat demands higher mitochondrial engagement. Subcutaneous fat is used earlier. Visceral fat becomes relevant only once fat metabolism is fully active. Walking excels here because it keeps stress low and oxygen high. This creates a measurable internal moment when walking transforms into a targeted visceral fat-burning process. And as walking continues, this effect strengthens minute by minute. Visceral fat is not passive storage. It functions like an endocrine organ. It communicates with the liver, influences hormones, and drives inflammation. When walking consistently within the fat oxidation zone, these signals begin to shift. Improved blood flow, better insulin response, and hormonal balance make visceral fat more available. Studies show visceral fat actually has a higher turnover rate than many expect. Once the correct physiological conditions exist, it responds quickly. Walking supports this by calming the nervous system and lowering cortisol, which otherwise shields visceral fat from being used. Over time, walking increases enzymes that transport fatty acids into mitochondria. This makes the body progressively better at using visceral fat as fuel. It's a subtle change, but powerful, especially for those new to movement. There's also a mental shift. Many begin walking for physical reasons, but discover improved focus, mood, and reduced anxiety. That mental clarity reinforces consistency, which is one of the strongest tools against visceral fat. Many people think fat loss depends only on speed or duration, but science describes something called the steady-state metabolic window. This is the phase where heart rate, oxygen use, and fat oxidation align. This is when visceral fat burning is most efficient. This window doesn't open immediately. It begins after full fat oxidation activation and lasts as long as intensity remains steady. Its power lies in balanced fat-driven energy, without stress overload. Understanding this changes how walking is perceived. A 40-minute walk differs from a 20-minute one, not because of calories, but because more time is spent in this optimized zone. Once you recognize this window, walking becomes strategic. And how you enter and maintain it determines visceral fat breakdown. Not all walking produces the same metabolic response. Very slow, strolling improves circulation but often never reaches fat oxidation thresholds. Effective walking simply creates the right internal conditions: moderate pace, steady rhythm, and efficient breathing. Posture matters more than most realize. An upright torso allows the diaphragm to move freely, improving oxygen exchange. Slouching, shallow breathing, or inefficient stride delays fat metabolism. Pace matters too. Too fast pushes the body back to glucose. Too slow fails to stimulate adaptation. The sweet spot is a comfortable but purposeful rhythm. In this state, mitochondrial activity and hormonal balance support visceral fat use. Once you understand this, walking becomes intentional rather than automatic, and your body's feedback becomes clearer with time. Even though the shift is internal, subtle signs appear. Breathing becomes deeper and effortless. Steps feel synchronized. Body temperature rises slightly, not from strain, but from increased cellular activity. Many experience mental clarity linked to improved blood flow and reduced stress response. Energy becomes steadier. Fat supply is slower, longer-lasting ATP, which explains why walking feels easier as it continues. Your body stops resisting and starts cooperating. Now that you recognize these signals, identifying the fat-burning moment becomes easier. And this awareness allows you to refine your routine for maximum visceral fat reduction. Daily walking creates adaptations that occasional sessions cannot. Mitochondria increase in number and efficiency, making fat usage easier. Over time, the fat-burning moment arrives sooner in each walk. Hormones regulating visceral fat like insulin and cortisol stabilize. Walking supports both when practiced consistently. Vascular function improves. Capillaries deliver oxygen more efficiently, helping deeper fat reach mitochondria. Visceral fat shifts from stubborn to accessible. Perhaps most importantly, walking reinforces a psychological rhythm. Movement becomes part of identity. Body and mind align toward metabolic health. A common mistake is assuming fat burning must feel intense. Visceral fat responds to metabolic readiness, not exhaustion. Many quit before adaptation occurs. Another misconception is speed. Walking too fast favors glucose, not fat. Slightly slowing down often produces better results. Inconsistency is another barrier. Skipping days resets metabolic adaptation. Steady rhythm matters more than extremes. Understanding how the body truly burns visceral fat prevents discouragement. When expectations match physiology, progress becomes visible. If this explanation helped you understand why walking works and why many quit too early, consider tapping. Super thanks to support science-based content like this. Your support helps us continue creating high-quality educational videos. With consistency, something remarkable happens. Your body begins preparing before you start. Heart rate stabilizes faster. Breathing settles sooner. Fat oxidation begins earlier. This is metabolic harmony. In this state, visceral fat becomes increasingly accessible. Fat transport enzymes work more efficiently. Hormones align. Each walk becomes more productive. The brain reinforces the habit, associating walking with clarity and balance. This feedback loop strengthens consistency and efficiency. Reaching this state isn't about speed or perfection. It's about understanding your physiology and working with it. When routine and biology align, walking becomes more than exercise. It becomes a metabolic partnership that reshapes health from the inside out. If this video helped you understand when walking truly begins burning visceral fat, like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs this insight. Your support helps this science-based knowledge reach more people.